Okay, here we go. Should be good now. Um, all right. Hello. Can you hear me? Hello. Hello. All right. You should be able to hear me now. So I apologize for that. Maybe what I'll do is I'll just start from the beginning. Give me a second. Prompt start. Okay, here we go. uh, all right. So, what does Star Wars teach us about the fall of democracy? Here are three ways to protect your companies, your institutions, and your society from demagogues. Now, there is no doubt that we live in perilous times. Never before have we been more divided as a country and as a society. Hatred is on full display on both sides. And try as we might, we cannot hide from it. Every single business is impacted by the supply chain. Every individual is impacted when justice means different things for different people. And so today we're talking about demagogues and we're talking about Star Wars, one of my favorite movies. And specifically, we're going to be talking about episodes 1, 2, and 3 of Star Wars. Often these three movies at the beginning don't get a lot of love, but I think it has an important lesson for us today. And so, demagogue, what is this word? This word comes from the Greek demos, which means the people, and agogos, which means leading the people. Now, while it originally didn't have a negative connotation, it eventually came to mean a troublesome kind of leader who occasionally arose in Athenian democracy. And so today, demagogue refers to a political leader in a democracy who gains popularity by arousing the common people against the elites, especially through speeches that arouse crowds, appealing to emotion, scapegoating groups of people, exaggerating dangers to stoke fears, and lying for emotional effect. And of course, using other types of rhetoric that tends to drown out reasoned debate and encourages people to become radicals. Now, demagogues often overturn the established norms of political conduct, or they promise to or they promise or threaten to do so. They say that we're going to turn the institution upside down. And so this is a topic that's very interesting because of how things have changed due to technology. And it is something that I'm excited to talk about on AIparenting.live. So if you're joining us for the first time, my name is Dr. Ed, and I'm just a geek dad who is obsessed about the future. And what I want to talk to you today about is a little bit about Star Wars, my favorite movie, but also how it relates to democracy. And so, if you're visiting for the first time, go and check out our site, AIparenting.live. You can just sign up for the email list and you can learn a little bit more about what we have to share. Now, here is something that is a lot of fun. We're going to start off by talking a little bit about this conclusion from Arkin the American. I think this is a fun way of starting off to learn a little bit about Star Wars and how it relates to democracy. So, okay, let's see if I can do this.
At the start of this video, I mentioned the backlash that the Star Wars prequels received for their politics back in the day. Various people have justified this backlash in various ways over the years, ranging from prequel politics being boring.
I have never known the plot of this movie until now. As far as the plot goes, I am only just now piecing it together after having watched this movie for 20 years.
To them being pointless.
His evil scheme is he really wants Queen Amidala to sign a paper.
To them just being too complicated.
Okay. I don't get it.
I, however, have an alternative theory. I believe that the reason so many people hated prequel politics was how much they resemble the politics of our real world. It's something I've avoided explicitly stating up to this point, but the politics of Star Wars are heavily inspired by the political struggles of the modern day. Star Wars, like all fantasy, is a form of escapism for many people. To be reminded of the political quagmire of the real world was understandably jarring for audiences back in 1999 who were expecting a swashbuckling adventure of the style seen in the original trilogy. Star Wars is obviously quite operatic and fantastical, but when you strip away the advanced technology and aliens and magic, what's left is a political situation not too dissimilar from our own. A corrupt and entropic political establishment that seems increasingly not to care for its own people, letting vital institutions and infrastructure crumble while they spend hours and days bickering over meaningless minutiae.
Okay. All right, we're back. So, I think that what they mentioned there, and I want to pause there. So, essentially, what they're saying is that Star Wars, like, we think of it as, wow, this is kind of like, it's hard for me to understand, and they found it kind of boring talking about all this politics stuff. And part of the reason it was boring was because it actually could have reminded us of our current situation in terms of politics. And I think it was designed as a warning for us to better understand our own democracy. And one of the key things that they mention at the beginning was erosion of trust. And I think that that's the first part that I want to talk about. And so what we've seen over the last years or so, and this is partly accelerated due to technology, is that we're seeing an erosion of trust across the board. So the reality is fake news spreads faster than real news. And we have systems, social media systems, that are totally focused on more engagement like likes or comments or shares, you name it. And the engagement focus leads to more anger, right? And so it tends to be the posts that have more anger in them that tend to get repeated. And so some of that could be patently false news, but those that false news or that misinformation tends to be the stuff that gets amplified. And really the key that they're referring to here in Star Wars is also a weakening of public institutions. So in general, what demagogues will try to do is weaken public health care, weaken education to the point where the government is no longer helping the people that it is designed to serve. And you find that over many different governments, they kind of bounce from one party to the next. Both of them tend to serve themselves more than they serve their actual people. And you see the kinds of debates that they had in Star Wars just representing a type of, they're just bickering about like things that don't matter to like regular people's lives. And that's kind of what leads to the need for someone like a demagogue to come by. So let's see if we can continue. I'll hopefully be able to explain a little bit more as we go. Is this going to work?
Offering no real solutions to the problems ailing the populace. Eventually, the people get fed up with the status quo and elect a populist who makes extravagant promises to fix everything. This is, of course, a con. Every populist, without exemption, is seeking more power for himself, ostensibly to help the people who elected him. The promise of populism is the promise of action in a political system where it seems that no action is ever taken. And thus, the ultimate irony of the Star Wars prequels is that the Republic and the Jedi deserved to fall. After a millennium of peace and prosperity, complacency had taken hold, and the institutions meant to serve the people began to serve only themselves.
All right, so now we're talking about the rise of... Oh, that's interesting. Hold on a sec. Right. Okay, there we go. So now we're talking about the rise of demagogues. And so what this means is there's just a loss of belief that the other party also cares about the country. And so instead of feeling like the other party has something to contribute, you feel like, oh, like you do everything in your power to prevent the other party from winning. And so instead of, like, for example, if somebody like the president or the prime minister isn't able to get their way, things are done through executive orders, they're done through court rulings or Supreme Court rulings if something like Congress won't pass it. And what we heard is these demagogues work like they're populist type leaders. They work with popular ideas, but they use radical methods and they sneak in. And the reason I thought that this was really interesting, and of course they're legitimized by the existing electing officials, is that this mirrors another, so where are we at? Okay, 112. This mirrors another method that was described inside the book, How Democracies Die. And I liked that a lot because this isn't just just in fiction. This happens in reality too. So we're going to go and visit a different video, and this one is going to talk about how democracies die.
So let's say
this
you
book,
have to
maybe I'll
read
just
an
put it into
incredibly
the
long
chat. And if
email
you
from
guys
your
have
boss
any
that you have to finish
questions,
before the big
feel
meeting
free
starts
to
in 10
post
minutes.
your question here.
Or you're cramming
So
for an
this
exam
is
the night
how
before, but can't
democracies-
bear to keep your eyes open to read one more textbook
Oops.
chapter.
Sorry, it's making some noise. How Democracies Die. And this is Levitsky and Ziblatt. Blatt. Okay. And we're going to take a quick look at this video. Once I get to this point. No, too far. There we go. And here we go. So this is Daniel Levitsky, who's going to be talking a little bit about how democracies die. But he's going to specifically be talking about the notion of demagogues and their popularity and how they've been popular since the beginning. Like, this is not something that is new. And I think that's important concept to understand, is that there's always room for demagogues throughout history. Okay, and here we go. Let's see if this works.
And we'll sketch out for you some of what we think are the most important points, and we'll kind of elaborate this all, that we elaborate more fully in the book. Okay, so I'm going to start off by talking about the first discovery, and Steve's going to talk about the second and thirds. So discovery number one. Discovery number one is this. The best way to stop authoritarians is to prevent them from coming to power in the first place.
Obviously.
Okay, so what does this mean, really? Well, in the context of the United States, this means we have to pay attention to not just why Donald Trump was elected, but also why he ever became the nominee of one of our two major political parties in the first place. So let me elaborate. In the Cold War, 3/4 of democratic breakdowns around the world happened at the hands of men with guns in the form of military coups. Since the collapse of communism, most democratic breakdowns now arrive at the ballot box through elections. Demagogues come to power and once in power through elections, and once in power, they usually inflict serious damage on democratic institutions. So a grave paradox, if you kind of think about this for a moment, facing democracies today, is how does a democracy prevent an autocratic-minded demagogue from getting elected in the first place? Now, through most of American history, we've happily avoided this paradox, but it was not because there was a kind of absence of demagogues or an absence of people who might support demagogues. In fact, we kind of have a tendency, I think, to whitewash our own history and to forget that there's nearly really a continuous strand of would-be authoritarians who generally gain around 30% approval support in opinion surveys. So this strand runs from Henry Ford in the 1920s, the founder of Ford Auto Company, a vocal and extremely popular anti-Semite who was actually quoted in Mein Kampf, who considered running for president in the 1920s, Huey Long in the 1930s, Joe McCarthy in the 1950s, George Wallace in the 1960s. So Gallup poll data actually exists going back to the 1930s. And for each of these figures, you see around roughly 35% approval ratings for each of these figures. And this is a continuous figure that runs all the way up to around 35% approval for our current president. So I don't think it's actually too much to say that there's a continuous strand of authoritarianism running as a subcurrent in American political culture. But here's the point. None of these figures I just mentioned ever made it close to the presidency. Though they were popular, they're kept far from power. So the question is how, and what changed in 2016? So in our book, we emphasize two contributing factors that we describe more fully, but I'll kind of just highlight them for you this evening. First, the way we picked presidents has changed. Until 1972 in America, the first 3/4 of the 20th century, presidential candidates were selected by party leaders, and what some political scientists have called a kind of system of peer review. So party leaders who worked closely with politicians, who saw politicians in moments of crisis and moments of triumph, worked with them on a daily basis. These were the guys who got together and decided who the candidates were.
Okay, so that is a really important concept right there. So what has really changed in democracy is that the way that people come into the world of politics has changed. So in the past, it was essentially party leaders. They called them these back room, like back cigar rooms, where essentially it was decided that, okay, who was going to be the person that was going to run for the party? That would be determined by the party leadership. And some of that still happens today, but it has become a little bit more of a democratic process. You've heard of the primaries. You've seen the process by which even like in Alberta, we have constituency associations, like how much things can change when a constituency decides, oh, okay, this is the person we're going to bring forth as the candidate, like through the voting process. And through populist means, it is very possible for somebody like a demagogue to get through all of the checks and balances. So back in in the original sense, it was always determined by the leadership, and that prevented people go like, this person is crazy. There's no way we're going to allow the demagogue, and it kept demagogues out. But it was often criticized as not a very democratic process for letting people in. However, the more democratic process, which allows somebody who is popular or who is a populist to come in, allows for demagogues to come in and very quickly enter into the world of politics, and then also quickly take control for themselves. Because ultimately, the goal of many demagogues is authoritarian control, right? So the purpose when they are in control is to destroy or to cause damage to the democratic institutions, be it education or healthcare or what have you. And so like this movement towards privatization or choice in education is just an opportunity to end that movement. So I think that this notion from Ziblatt was very important, as one of the ways that you do it is you have to do it to prevent them from coming in to start with. And this doesn't matter if you are like talking about politics or if you're talking about an institution like in education, it could be the same way. Like the school trustees, for example, can very easily be taken over, right? Like I remember during the trustee election with the Catholic School Board, there are only seven people that make all of your decisions. So if you can get like four of them on board with whatever your policy are, you could take control of the entire like educational institution, like the Calgary Catholic School District, pretty easily. And so these kinds of things, they don't think that they're just for politics. They are for every organization they apply to. If you're a business, how big is your typical board, right? You've got maybe 7 people, 6, 7 people. Maybe sometimes it's even 5 people. Like it can be a very small board, and it doesn't take a lot of people to turn in order for somebody like a demagogue to come in and just really change the establishment in a big and significant way. And so to me, like this stuff is just fascinating, and it relates to like Star Wars in such a close way. And I want to keep going. I want to talk a little bit more about the politics of Star Wars, because I think that he goes into a lot of detail here. So let's keep on going.
Meanwhile, the Jedi Order became stagnant and dogmatic, failing to adapt to the changing times and losing sight of their purpose. Palpatine, therefore, is the ultimate populist, hijacking the political system and taking ever more power for himself. Finally, after the institutions that guided the Republic had been sufficiently weakened, Palpatine struck while the iron was hot, and turned himself into an absolute dictator. But he didn't do this all of his own sheer brilliance. The Republic, as portrayed in The Phantom Menace, was already halfway into the grave. All Palpatine had to do was exploit the broken systems contained within it. Under Palpatine, the Republic turned into an empire long before anybody called it that, and by the end of the Clone Wars, Palpatine was a dictator in all but name. Indeed, this is a sentiment echoed over and over again throughout Star Wars.
Have you ever considered that we may be on the wrong side?
What do you mean?
What if the democracy we thought we were serving no longer exists, and the Republic has become the very evil we've been fighting to destroy?
With your help, the Jedi can stop Sidious before it's too late.
Too late? For what? The Republic to fall? It already has, and you just can't see it. There is no justice, no law, no order, except for the one that will replace it. The time of the Jedi has passed. They cannot defeat Sidious.
I want to restore the Order.
Restore the Jedi Order? Oh, you poor fool. It's over! Jedi fell long before the Purge. It was stifled by tradition. Deafened by our past glories. Blinded by endless war.
Maybe. But it's never over, Malicos. We stand here now, with the chance to learn, to rebuild from our mistakes.
Jedi learn. There's no future for them. How can you not see that?
The Republic was doomed long before it came to its official end, and in many ways, it ended the day that the Clone Wars began. The entire Republic rallied behind Palpatine, allowing him ever more executive power, and cheering as he stripped them of their liberties. Ultimately, they would cheer the Republic into its grave. In the aftermath, a scattered few carried the torch of liberty in different...
Okay. So, I keep bringing this back to Star Wars because it is such a good example where this change did not come through authoritarian rule, through the use of weapons, like an incursion. That is not how the world of Star Wars was taken over. It was a gradual process. And I really liked how they described, oh my gosh, like you still believe that this republic still exists? Like it's over. The institutions, they don't work anymore. And people stop believing in public institutions. They stop believing that the government is actually there to help them. And so as a result, they feel like they have no choice. And this feeling of helplessness is expressed in the most extreme of ways. And we're seeing that. And that's why this is a very, I'm doing this through like a movie, a fantasy, but it's a very real thing, right? If we look at the January 6th insurrection, and if we look at the Freedom Convoy 2022, these are extreme voices that are saying we don't feel represented by the current political climate, the current political environment. And we are to the point of, we talk about polarization to the point of radicalization. These people are willing to do highly illegal things in order to achieve their means. And so you can imagine, and this was the thing that was mentioned earlier by Ziblatt, is that at any given time in history, demagogues were popular. That you would be able to, with any demagogue, you'd be able to get about 30% of the vote at any point in time. But usually there's some checks and balances. Usually through the way that they vet candidates, they prevent them from coming in. However, with a move towards more democratic processes, it does also enable the demagogues to come in. Plus, combine that with social media that is going to be really good at like echo chambering or amplifying any types of angry voices that they have. We have the perfect environment for demagogues. And so we don't see it. Often, they come to power and we celebrate it because it's like, oh yes, finally, like the freedom that I was looking for is going to arrive. And we think, oh, okay, like now things are going to be great. But the reality is this person was never in it for you. They were always in it for maintaining more control. And you look at it like they're destroying our public institutions for what reason? Like, for example, in Alberta, when we had the pandemic, at the beginning of the pandemic in March 2020, our education minister, Adriana Lagrange, laid off 24,000 educators. It was the biggest layoff in the history of Canada. It never before had any company, any government, any institution laid off that many people in one go. So it was the biggest layoff in Canadian history. And so these kinds of things, they happen, and they happen fast. And often people are blindsided. They're like, oh, how come we never saw this coming? It's because many of the checks and balances that used to be there. And I'll give you another example. So it used to be the case that we had checks and balances for news, right? Just regular news had to go through an editorial. It had to be checked for facts. There was even like what you saw on videos, they had to be verified by the media authorities. Then you had to issue apologies if things were not factual. So people could depend on news. But nowadays, we're talking about a news organization that is half, a quarter of what it used to be. They're a fraction of their size. They don't have time to really focus on getting all the facts right. And so hence the fake news, this attack against the media. And now with this, things are changing dramatically. And so I want to also highlight this is just a tweet that I had previously seen that I really liked. Because it talked a little bit about just a person at a bar, and if you don't mind, I'm gonna just read it out because I think it's pretty it's pretty relevant for today. So I'm not gonna so like I won't say the swears. That's not what I do, but here we go. So it says, I was at a bar once getting maybe I'll make it bigger. Getting an after-work beer, and one of these like bars where the bartender clearly hates you. So the bartender and I were ignoring one another when someone sits next to me and he immediately says, "No, get out." And the dude next to me says, "Hey, I'm not doing anything. I'm a paying customer." And the bartender reaches under the counter for a bat or something and says, "Out now." And the dude leaves, kind of yelling. And he was dressed in a punk uniform, I noticed. Anyways, I asked, what was that about? And the bartender was like, "You didn't see his vest, but it was all Nazi. Iron crosses and stuff. You get to recognize them." I was like, "Oh, okay." And he continues, "You have to nip it in the bud immediately. These guys come in and it's always nice. It's always a nice person, right?" And so this individual, we're just talking about a bar, and he's just saying it's just a nice person. Generally, yes. However, it's always a nice and a polite one. And you serve them because you don't want to cause a scene. And then they become a regular. And after a while, they bring a friend, and that dude is cool too. And then they bring friends, and the friends bring friends, and they stop being cool. And then you realize, oh, this is a Nazi bar now. And it's too late because they're entrenched. And if you try to kick them out, they cause a problem. So you have to shut them down. I was like, oh. And he said, you have to ignore their reasonable arguments because their end goal is to be terrible, awful people. The end goal is to be terrible, awful people. And you have to nip that in the bud. So this is the thing about populists. It always starts with the best of intentions, right? And it's like, yeah, let us in. We're going to help you win the election. Things are going to be great. We're going to create the types of change. But the goal was never change for your benefit. The goal was change so that it can establish their rule, their authoritarian rule. And that's really what is happening in the world of Star Wars is you have this person who Palpatine seems so nice on the outside. He's going to deliver the change. And others, especially other politicians, believe him. And they allow him, they enable him to succeed. And this is where it gets into the next portion, which I think is very important, just about that process. So I want to go to number 10. And I'll talk a little bit about the next step in this process. So they get through by popularity. I talked about that. And then let's keep going. I'm going to go back to Stephen Levitsky and Daniel Ziblatt because I think Ziblitsky explains the next step quite well.
This was a system often criticized, rightly, as smoke-filled back rooms, where party leaders would get together and choose the candidates, and voters were basically irrelevant. Voters mattered, of course, in general elections, but their primaries were not binding. Not most states didn't. People often criticize about it. It had some downsides. It was exclusive. It wasn't very good. And as somebody who was not an impressive president, but this system had its downsides. But all systems have advantages and disadvantages. And the advantages of this system was that it worked quite well, in fact, perfectly, in keeping extremists from ever becoming viable candidates at the top of the ticket or for office in the first place. So it was a screening system, a filtration system. Now, we all know American life changed in many profound ways in the tragic year of 1968. And it was a tragic year in American history. But it also changed in the way we select our presidential candidates. The presidential candidate selection system after 1968 was opened up. The smoke-filled rooms were opened. Primaries were made binding. Voters could now select their candidates. And general election was now preceded by a long, continuous primary season where voters had a say. And we all know this system. Now, this certain system was certainly more open, but two political scientists in the early 70s warned that the fall of the filtration system could also open the door to demagogues. Now, to be clear, we don't advocate going back to the old system. But at the same time, we have to recognize the current system is double-edged. In this new system, if a demagogue ever ran for office, the road was much clearer for him or her. It's true the Democrats in the 1980s introduced a system of superdelegates, so elected officials who carried extra weight, which contained some of the elements of the old system. But Republicans never adopted this. They never adopted a system of superdelegates. So this left the door open. This meant that if a demagogue ever decided to run for president, especially in the Republican Party, without superdelegates, there was much more open road for him. And this is exactly what happened in 2016. Donald Trump, a modern-day demagogue, became the nominee of the Republican Party. But there's a second factor we also elaborate in the book. In some ways, I think we both think this is a more important factor. And this is a second factor which cleared the way for the rise of Donald Trump. Because even after Donald Trump won the nomination, he could have been defeated by Hillary Clinton. That's certainly true. But almost as importantly, there was an absolutely imperative role to be played by the Republican Party allies. So here's really the central pivot of this part of our story. Authoritarians come to power not on their own, but with the enabling aid of political allies from the political establishment. So that throughout history, this repeats itself. From Italy in the 1920s, Germany in the 1930s, Latin America in the 1990s. This is really a crucial test. When demagogues who clearly violate democratic norms get close to power, one of the last off-ramps is whether or not establishment politicians, party allies, finally break with the demagogue, or the autocrat in the making. Do they draw a line in the sand and say, beyond this we will not go? Or do they abdicate? Do they overlook the democratic violations? They let party trump country and commitment to democratic norms, and in effect form a Faustian bargain, allowing their ideological ally, but who may be an autocrat in the making, into power. Do they enable the authoritarian?
Do they enable the authoritarian? That's the key. That's the key of the second part. And so I thought that was really interesting because it was not just like Palpatine in Star Wars, but it was Queen Amidala who said, yeah, like I support his movement. I think that, we should give him an opportunity. And so it was people from the existing establishment that were supporting him that caused the big change, the big shift. And I see that as the one of the key factors is this enabling of the existing establishment. People will come in and say, like, he's great. Even to today, there are still many people who are still very supportive of Donald Trump. And part of this is like he has a lot of allies within it. And they're as much the enabling force as letting a demagogue in the first place, the checks and balances. And so how can we, what can be done about these types of demagogues? What are the different approaches? And so given my background in technology, my focus with AI parenting, I focus on like AI that would be something that I would be comfortable putting my kids in front of. And this is an example of it. And so if you want to learn a little bit more, like just go and visit AIparenting.live. But that's why I'm very concerned as a parent is like many of the existing AI systems, I do not feel comfortable putting my own children in front of it. And so I think that really, and I'll kind of move into this a little bit more as we get close to the conclusion here, that the key is that these are enabled by the existing establishment. They see it as a good thing. They see it as something that is going to help them very much. But the reality is, even after they've stripped away all of their liberties, and like they talked about like the politicians who were clapping, right? They were happy that their liberties were being removed. Even after that, they still don't want to admit that they were wrong. They don't want to draw that line in the sand. And our inability to draw the difference between right and wrong is something that is causing a lot of the change that is happening in politics. And that's this new environment, this demagogue friendly environment online is fueled by our social media. And so to say, oh, like the media companies have no responsibility, that's why we need accountability. This is why we need more careful evaluation of the social media that is out there, because that really does form a lot of the public opinion. And so one of the best ways of becoming extremely popular is to have very extreme views online. If you have very extreme views, you're going to get a lot of engagement. You're going to get a lot of likes. You're going to get a lot of comments. Even if they're hateful comments, that is still good, because the computer does not know the difference between a mean comment versus a positive comment. There's no difference between the two for most computer algorithms, the way that they're designed today, which is just to increase engagement, to keep you on the platform as long as possible. And so it was very interesting, like all these social media companies, they waited until the very last moment. It's like, okay, he's no longer president, to remove Donald Trump's social media accounts, which really, like, you took his voice and it just really decimated it compared to what it was when he could just throw out a tweet and then everyone would be aware of it. Like, the amount of reach that one individual had was significant. And so this is the same. This is the same as it's the same as the bar example that I just described. Some of you, maybe you're familiar with this, like the Steve Jobs referred to the Bozo Explosion. Do you remember that? Inside his, I think it was the Walter Isaacson book. The Bozo Explosion. Essentially, you have one person who is a bozo or who isn't very good in your organization. And well, that person's going to invite their friends, and all their friends are going to all be bozos as well. And then before you know it, your entire corporation, your entire company is full of bozos. And so you have to be able to draw that line and say, no, I will not allow that kind of individual in my organization. I need to cut it off very early. And most people, like, they're trying to be friendly. They're like, oh, this person's being really nice, but they're harming your organization directly. And so you need to cut them off very early. Like, you nip it in the bud is the way that it was described by this bartender. And I love this story because that's what you have to do, is you have to nip it in the bud, because it grows not linearly, it grows exponentially. And so what this means is bringing in Donald Trump doesn't just bring in Donald Trump. It brings in his family. It brings in others who directly support him. And soon, before you know it, much of the Republican establishment is full of people who are basically following the philosophy of Donald Trump. And maybe there were some people there before, but that's the key, is like this kind of thing, it grows exponentially, it grows extremely fast. And with our exponential technologies, such as artificial intelligence and social media, it is going to continue to grow faster and faster. And that is kind of my key here. And before we go, I want to see if we can conclude on this How Democracy Dies part. Hopefully, this will give you some final insights.
Defiance of the Empire, and eventually that torch would burn bright once more. But that's a story for another day. For now, let us guard our liberty jealously, and rather than relinquishing our republic, let us work to perfect it. Let us beware of the cheap temptations of populism, of the quick fix it offers, for it is a lie and will bring nothing but pain. Democracy and liberty are precious, and they have cost too much struggle, too much suffering, to be given up for the cheap price of rhetoric. Let us heed George Lucas's prophetic warning, and maybe, just maybe, should our republic survive, we may all go forth into a bright future.
So that's really the main message for today, is one of hope, one of optimism. I really do feel that we keep democracy strong when we believe that the other party or the other team has the best interests of our population, our society, our company, our institutions at heart. Democracy really starts to die when we have a breakdown of that trust, right? So my recommendations, and I'm going to summarize them as this. The first one is, is we need to have this foundation of trust. If you do not have a foundation of trust, you're creating the kinds of conditions that is going to lead to divisiveness and a breakdown of helping even the people that you are trying to serve. And so really trust is at the core of this. And that doesn't mean that everybody has to be like you. This is the mistake that so many people make, is they think, oh, I've got to create an organization where everybody's like the CEO and they just listen. No, that's not what I mean. Like a good democracy, a functioning democracy, has to have differing points of view. That's why you have different competing parties. And it is from listening to those different points of view that you get the best solution overall. And so that functioning trust, there needs to be, so that's step number one. Step number two is, in order to protect democracy, you also need to have some type of vetting process. So when you're bringing people in, what does the interview look like? And a lot of people who, let's say you're interviewing somebody for a company, we look at, well, do you have this skill or do you have this skill? And they don't look as much at things like, well, what is your values, right? What are your principles? What are your morals as an individual? And those are, I would argue, more important than the skill, because you can learn the skill. You cannot learn the morals and the values and the principles. Those are ones that you have with you. And so know what the people who work with you, what they stand for, who they stand against, what do they permit, what do they stand against. Because what you'll find is that, and this has happened so many times where with partnerships, like let's go back to the Spotify Joe Rogan, right? Come on, like you gotta know what this person stands for. You gotta know what are their morals, their values, principles. Does it align with where your company is? Because something's gonna happen, and that's what's going to generate this massive like cancel culture. People are going to be quitting your system en masse. Same with Facebook, right? Like you've got to look at like the people that you work with. What are the values of this company? Right? Is it just profit? If it is, then you have to understand like that is the morals. Those are the principles. And when people start to see that, they start leaving en masse. And guess what? Like your company starts hemorrhaging money like crazy. And so this is the key is we live in a society where I feel that our diversity and our ability to listen to that diversity is our strength. And being able to make sure that you have different people, like it doesn't matter if you come from a different ethnic background. Actually, that's a good thing. That's something that you want to encourage. But what matters is that you are aligned in terms of your morals, values, and your principles. And that way you get a diverse set of opinions moving in the same direction. And often that's not always the case. And then on the flip side, you also need to make sure that the people in the establishment have that moral character, have that moral fiber, that they can see wrong and they can stand against that. They have like this is the key is in so many organizations, you have you have a strong leader, a strong like CEO surrounded by weak individuals who only say yes, 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 yes. No, this is terrible, right? Like if you don't have people who can disagree with you, then these kinds of things will just grow and they will balloon and they will become a cancer that will destroy your organization will destroy your institution and they will destroy your society. And so I would like to use this as an opportunity to say, like, yes, there are bad things when we get demagogues in. Yes, they are focused on destroying public institutions because that helps them stay in power. It helps them achieve the type of autocratic power that they really desire. But we as an organization and as a people have an opportunity to be those checks and balances along the way. We can do this at many different levels. If you are on the social media level, it is that information, right? Making things transparent, putting the data out there, adding that level of transparency does provide a level of accountability. If you're in the institution level, if you're somebody who is in the political realm or in the organization, you can be that moral voice in your organization. You can make a big difference just by being that check or that balance that is so badly needed today. And if you are the senior leadership or you are part of the vetting process for people who would become nominees, then you have a strong responsibility to make sure that everybody who comes in fits the morals, the values, and the principles that you have in your organization. And so as much as possible, it is there that we have checks and balances to ensure that we don't have that Bozo Explosion, that we don't have those people coming into the bar that we didn't want coming into the bar, that we don't have the Palpatines that come and take over the Senate and take over your entire republic. And so with that, I want to encourage you. My background today is in Coruscant. Some of you may have noticed already. I put a few links. One is just to the Star Wars box series. I do feel like if you haven't seen it already, this is required, required watching. And of course, How Democracies Die by Stephen Levitsky and Daniel Ziblatt is very powerful. And if you haven't seen their link already, maybe if you want to actually watch that video about how democracies died, they did a politics and prose, and I really like that channel. Politics and prose has a lot of detail that's quite good. You can go and search it online. So just how democracies die, basically, and then you'll be able to find it. But the other thing I would encourage you, if you haven't already checked it out, go and visit aiparenting.live. I want you to go and visit this site because on our site, we've got an email list that you can sign up for, and I'm going to be doing a masterclass. I want to know about what you think is going to be interesting, but I think, and feel free to pop it in the chat of what you would like to see. But I'm thinking about doing something related to something I call video presence. A lot of people talk about, it's been 2 years. I mean, we've been doing this Zoom thing for a couple years, and I still feel like we're struggling to communicate using online media, such as live streams, like what I'm doing today. And I feel that if we start to have a few core principles, just some basics, you can dramatically change your presence online. And that is the objective of video. You want to feel like you and I are having more of a face-to-face conversation. I want to be feeling like I have a more face-to-face conversation with you. And so I want to go over some basics of that, because once you understand the basics of how I approach, how I think about sound, how I think about video, you're going to start to understand a little bit more of the advanced stuff that I want to get into, which is kind of a metaverse style live stream. And you can see, in my background, I have Coruscant and I have things that are relevant to what I'm talking about today. And I'm going to have elements kind of posted in the foreground as well. So the way that I approach things is layers. And I'll talk a little bit about the different layers that I can introduce in my live streams. And some of the stuff which I'm excited to be working on, it's going to involve some more AI technology. So if you haven't already, make sure you hit like, you write a comment, you subscribe if you're able to, or you follow my account. You're going to learn a lot more in the next coming weeks and in the masterclass. And I'll sign you up for it. In fact, I have much of the videos already done. If you want, I'll even give you a discount for I call it the video funnels, which is the next step. Once you've established presence, then how do you turn that into something that kind of becomes a lead magnet for bringing in more clients, more attention to your business or to your funnel. And so I think that might be a fun thing to do. So if you're interested, write a comment, let me know, say hi. If you found something that was useful, write something in the chat. What I've been told is sometimes you just put like some flames in the chat. And then that's a way that, people like that you show, hey, I really appreciate what you did. And so I'm going to throw a few flames in the chat to show an example. I love those. It's fun. So we are here for you. We appreciate you joining today. Sorry, the little bit of a technical glitch at the beginning that I'm still working on. And with that, I want to encourage you, because you're the gatekeeper. You're the one who's the balance and the checks to make sure that our children and our future and our society is protected. And really, we depend on you, on people. Like if you're watching this till the end, like clearly you have an interest in democracy. And I really believe in democracy, and I believe that it is, like the author said, it's precious. It's something that we must protect, something that we have to understand that, yes, there is a constant fight for it, because there's also like another fight that's happening to destroy it, not through physical means, like not through war, but actually through the actual democratic process. And so help protect democracy. Think about how you can be involved. How can you stand up against somebody who is a demagogue? How can you do something in your own company to prevent the Bozo Explosion from happening? How can you, through your institution, ensure that you don't have like these extreme political ideas entering into your schools? Because what you find is that I go to every single parent, teacher, parent, trustee event that I'm able to access. And there are full-on demagogue parents, right? They're talking about, what is this CRT? It must be CRT. We can't talk about race because, this is racism against our community. And nobody stands up against it. And so it's kind of assumed that, oh, this must be true, right? Like, how are you standing up against racism? It's a silent thing. Like often when we're attacked, and this is key. Like when we feel attacked, we want to run away. We don't want to stand up and fight. And that's exactly what demagogues want. They want to be constantly on the attack, constantly forcing us into a corner of silence where we say nothing about what is happening today. And we need to build that bravery. We need to encourage each other to let each other know that, wow, we cannot have this. This is not who we are. This is not what we stand for. And we need to realize that there are others who are just like us, who feel the same way, who, if we stood up and we said something about it, they would be also supporting us. They just don't have the bravery, perhaps, the boldness, the audacity in order to stand up today. But they will. They will, and you can show the way. You can lead the way. One person standing up can make a world of difference. And so I want to encourage you today and in the future, think about that one thing. What is that one thing that you're going to stand up for? And you can't stand up for everything. I'm sorry. That's not possible. But you can stand up for one thing. So write down, what is that one thing I'm going to stand up for today? Let's talk about it. And I will see you next time. Thank you. Take care. I really appreciate you. And I encourage you, go and check out AIparenting.live. Get in contact with me. Let me know what was valuable to you. And we will see you in the next one.